Chapter 1. Welcome to my world. The lights had been dimmed in the business class cabin of the United Airlines overnight flight from New York to London, the red-eye, as it is known to frequent travelers. Most passengers were silent and still. Only a few were properly asleep, but many had huddled down under their scarlet airline-issue blankets to try and snatch a few hours of fitful rest. My traveling companion in the adjacent seat, the wealthy sales director of a British computer company, was lying prone and also covered with a blanket. Neither he nor I, however, was expecting any sleep during the flight. I was awake because I am a professional dominatrix who was being paid to tease and hurt my neighbor mercilessly that night. He was most definitely not asleep because his hands were tied behind his back and regular jolts of electricity were coursing through the metal contacts of the elasticized straps I'd wrapped tightly around his testicles and the glands of his penis. I watched his face carefully as we lay, barely a foot apart, with just the shared armrest of the seat between us, our heads turned towards each other, and our eyes locked together in the dim light. Charles adores me, looking deep into his eyes whilst I am torturing him, and years of experience have taught me that you can judge a man or woman's pain endurance levels more accurately through their eyes than by any other method. The remote control device I was using, much like the one you use for your television, adjusts the strength of the battery-powered electric current rolling in waves across his genitalia. The trick is always to ensure that the discomfort levels are as high as my client can bear, without making him cry out in pain. And the last thing Charles wanted was for one of the attentive stewardesses to notice anything amiss on their irregular patrols along the darkened aisle. I wouldn't really have minded if our kinky little game had been uncovered. I am often paid to humiliate my clients in public, and was born with barely an embarrassment gene in my body. My only worry on this occasion was breaking the airline's rules against using an electronic device in flight. They always claim, don't they, that it might interfere with the aircraft's navigation systems? Glancing at one of the 3 watches habitually strapped to my wrist, yes, I know it's weird, but it's my own private timekeeping fetish. I realized that our fellow passengers would soon be stirring. It was time to bring our game to an end. I touched the remote control button one last time to ensure that Charles' penis and balls were suffering all the pain he desired. Then I made sure he was watching as I slipped a surgical latex glove onto my hand. His excitement levels grew rapidly, his breath quickening and lips slightly parting as my hand crept discreetly under the blanket draped across us. Fumbling in the darkness, I squeezed the head of his cock, momentarily increasing the impact of the electrics and forcing the first, barely audible, moan of pain from deep in his throat. It was then but the work of a moment to rub my rubber-gloved fingers along his shaft and bring him to a shuddering sexual climax. My hand continued moving gently to give him as much afterglow pleasure as possible, a little reward for the pain he had endured. Honestly, I sometimes surprise myself with what a kind mistress I can be. Then, still working by feel in the semi-darkness, I untied his hands, lay back in my seat, and left him to clean himself up as best he could. My Emmanuel-type moment of teasing and torturing a client during a busy international flight is one of the more unusual requests I've fulfilled in nearly 2 decades as a professional dominatrix. The biggest challenge came not from playing the in-flight game, but in carrying the equipment through airport security. The tiny battery pack and remote control easily pass as a phone or iPod, whilst the cock and ball straps have tiny metal contacts but look like a fashionable wristband. Neither had aroused any interest as we passed through Heathrow and Newark airports on the outward journey. My aviation adventure was the climax, literally, of a 3-day trip to the US as the paid companion of my London-based client, Charles, a regular visitor to my dungeon. He had planned it partly as a treat for me, but mostly because he was desperate to enliven an otherwise boring business trip that was of necessity keeping him away from his wife and his family. Staying together in a midtown Manhattan hotel, we had explored both the city and each other's BDSM, the acronym popularly employed as shorthand for bondage, domination, sadism and masochism fantasies in a frantic day and night whirlwind of sightseeing and sexy games. It was far from being the first time that I had sessioned with Charles, but we had never before had so much time together to tease out his deepest fantasies and fears. For me, there was the fascination of delving deep into Charles' mind and uncovering thoughts and desires that he had never openly admitted, even to himself. For him, there was the pleasure of my company by day and of the pain and torment I could bring him by night. The beauty of it was that Charles was not even, in a technical sense, being unfaithful to his wife. He, like all of the men who visit me, knows that I never have sex with my clients, well, not with the male ones at least. A man may well receive some satisfaction at my hands, or at the mechanical hands of the intriguing variety of milking and masturbation machines to be found in my dungeon, but sex with me is not on the menu. The lack of penetration is rarely an issue with my visitors. They seek an experience which, whilst sexy and ultimately exciting, is centered more in their minds than in their testicles. For a complex variety of reasons, they wish to be dominated, or controlled, or tightly bound in rubber or leather. They wish to be kinky and naughty and told off by a powerful and dominant woman. They wish to live out fantasies which may have haunted them from childhood. They long to test out their limits of pain, or suffocation, or secret desires of bisexuality. In short, they are seeking new experiences far removed from the vanilla intercourse of their everyday lives. My Manhattan trip friend, many of my clients do go on to become friends, exhibited one trait which I have noticed over and over again in my years of intimately studying the male of our species. Returning to my side after each business meeting, he was desperate to be mistreated and humiliated in every way possible. The more successful the business element of our trip became, the more urgent was his craving to be taken down a peg or two by me. I have long known two truths about successful men. The more intelligent they are, then the greater their desire for sexual adventure, and the more successful they are, the greater their need to be dominated. It is like the Chinese concept of yin and yang, a necessary balancing of their success with an equal measure of torment and despair. It does, thankfully, create a seemingly endless demand for me and for my fellow professional dominatrices around the world. All in all, my American trip proved to be as successful as Charles' impressive sales achievements, a substantial addition to my bank balance, some shop till you drop fun in New York, a couple of days sightseeing as my client fulfilled his business obligations in the Big Apple, and an interesting flight home, a not quite typical week in the life of Miss Miranda, aka the bondage mistress. Welcome to my world of professional domination. Chapter 2. Into the dungeon. I should like to say that my life consists of a succession of glamorous international flights, with a parade of charming and wealthy companions, but I'd be giving the wrong impression. True, there are enough rich men around to keep a girl happy, and not short of a little luxury once in a while, but the deliciously perverted billionaires of 50 Shades of Grey fame are somewhat short on the ground in the real world. There is, however, a constant supply of real men, real women, and real couples who enjoy stretching their sexual boundaries by visiting a professional dominatrix. The publicity surrounding high-profile bondage and domination fans, such as the former F1 motor racing boss Max Mosley, has combined with the success of the fictional, sadomasochistic, 50 Shades style erotica to stimulate interest in my previously secret world. Once I would have preferred to stay in the shadows. I used to lie about what my job was by pretending to be a beauty therapist. Today, I can talk more freely of the secret pleasures I bring to many people. I can run a legitimate business, pay my taxes, and enjoy the fruits of my labor as a businesswoman and entrepreneur. The sexual desires of others have brought me success and job satisfaction. Even so, the majority of my sexy games are played out not in the mile-high club surroundings of a Boeing 757, but in the more spacious and considerably better equipped surroundings of West London Towers, my pet name for my warm and welcoming play premises. Come with me now on a tour of that dungeon. I should perhaps say, those dungeons, because here, you'll find room after room of erotic and exotic equipment designed to stretch your senses and your body. You will, of course, only ever arrive at my door by appointment, perhaps from an initial and somewhat nervous telephone call, or after an inquiring email to one of my websites. It used to be that I would answer every telephone inquiry myself, but with business so brisk, these days you may find yourself speaking with my professional answering service. A well-spoken young woman will discreetly ascertain that you wish to make an appointment with Miss Miranda before consulting my diary for an available date. It's an interesting sign of the times that my executive answering service has no more qualms about handling the affairs of a London dominatrix than it does about answering the calls of the businessmen and bankers who make up the bulk of their trade. On reflection, they probably consider that compared with a banker, my adult industry job makes me the more morally upright member of their clientele. Whichever way you make initial contact, I will have asked for an email summarizing your desires, with an outline of your sexual preferences, and brief details of the particular services you require. The key word here is brief. The emails I receive could form a book in themselves. A few will be concise and to the point, rubber please spanking and bondage boot, worship and breath control. Others, despite my demand for brevity, run to pages of elaborate prose explaining scenarios of abduction, kidnap, interrogation, and lengthy sentences of incarceration within the walls of my dungeon cells. For both of our sakes, I need to get inside your head before our session starts and understand your private fantasy needs. However, with the best will in the world, I rarely have time to read your 15 pages of erotica eagerly describing every much anticipated lash of my whip, or detailing in Boy Scout enthusiasm the precise knots you hope I will use to bind you to my bondage bench. We dominatrices call such behavior topping from the bottom, attempting to control every step of a session, and leaving little room for our own cruel and creative contribution. I hate being constrained in that way because it removes all of the fun of my own input into our games. So, whether you are a lustful man or a curious woman, just place yourself, without reservation, into my not-so-tender hands and we'll both enjoy the experience so much more. Entering my premises, you will be shown upstairs to the main dungeon, and allowed a brief time alone to compose your thoughts and perhaps shower away the cares of your day. Here, your nervous excitement can build to the maximum. Around you sit the instruments of restriction, teasing, and torment which may shortly be employed upon your body. Interrogators, from medieval times onwards, have long known the value of their victims' imagination. I recently read a history of the Inquisition from which one passage has stuck in my mind. The accused would then be shown the various contraptions of torture. The majority broke down easily and the application of the machines was unnecessary. Being somewhat more civilized than the Inquisition, I prefer to think of this worrying anticipation as a form of foreplay, an exciting interlude before our quasi-sexual encounter commences. Many first-time clients, particularly the women and couples, wander nervously around the room. They study, but rarely dare to touch the large and scary pieces of equipment, and the displays of clamps, hoods, gas masks, open-mouthed dental gags, and intriguing medical instruments that line the walls. The men tend to sit quietly, awaiting their fate. Could it be that women are simply the more naturally curious gender, or possibly that they are the braver? The truth is that I've designed this waiting period to heighten your senses for what is to come. You and I are about to engage in a fascinating theatrical drama. I need you in the most receptive of moods to truly appreciate my grand entrance upon the stage. In due course, you hear the slow footfall of my high heel boots on the stairs and the dungeon door opens. Experienced and well-trained devotees are by now prostrate on the polished wooden floor, not daring to meet their beloved mistress's gaze. But for the newer admirers among you there will be a warm and welcoming smile. I wish to sit for a moment and put you at your ease with a little chat. For me, this is one of the most important moments of our time together. I'll already know how long a session you've booked and the type of services you are seeking. This is now your opportunity, your only opportunity to elaborate on your most secret desires. The more honest you are, the more you will benefit from the hours that lie ahead. Years of experience have given me the ability to see beyond what you say, to interpret your innermost thoughts, and to decide on the best shape of the session to come. There is nothing you can say that might shock me. The panoply of the kinky extremes of human sexual activity has been laid before me many times before. It may well be that I gently remind you of the few activities in which I will not engage, but I never mind you asking. You must lay bare your soul to find out what is or isn't possible. We will also now discuss the use of your safe word or phrase you can utter if you truly want our games to stop. Some of my more experienced followers, the ones who have earned the status of being an own slave, delight in not employing a safe word. They have absolute trust in my ability to accurately judge their levels of distress and to temper my torments to suit their psychological and physical limits. For most of my clients, however, the knowledge that they can use their safe word in extremis is a reassuring backstop. There's little fun to be had, for example, from suffering muscle cramps in the middle of a lengthy bondage game, or of holding back an overwhelming need to pee while suspended in straps from the ceiling. A safe word will bring you much needed relief in all senses of the word in either of those unfortunate circumstances. Now that our initial interview is over, I alone will decide what will happen to your body and your mind over the next hour, or 2, or 3. Your treatment may require a visit to my medical chambers, my suspension room, or my cells. In each of these rooms you will usually be kept in the strictest of bondage, restrained by ropes or chains, or trapped within the confines of a leather straitjacket or one of my many rubber body bags, wrapped snugly around your body. The choice of material is yours. The severity and duration of the bondage will be mine. Depending on your desires, you may or may not be in pain. Some clients crave the bite of my nipple clamps, the sting of my whip, or the dull ache of excited confinement within a tight metal chastity belt. Others prefer a gentler experience, the floating feeling of being suspended from my body board as it is winched effortlessly into the air, the claustrophobic touch of a leather mask strapped tightly across the face, or the incessant throb of an electric butt plug inserted into their rear. Whatever your torment of choice, your role is now simplicity itself. You will obey instantly my every command and suffer or be pleasured precisely as I and I alone may wish. Our time for talking is over. Indeed, this is often a good moment for me to introduce a gag and pump it up sufficiently to ensure your silent acquiescence in our game. You are now at the mercy of my creative skills, my long experience in the dark arts of domination, and my skilled and caring hands. Many players use the expression power exchange to describe the experience, and although it is not a term I use often, it does sum up what has occurred between us. You have given me absolute power over your body and mind. I have accepted it. Let us explore together how corrupting that can be. There are distinct differences between the way that men and women react when I share such details about what I do for a living. Men are often overcome with shyness, have no idea what to say to me, and rapidly descend into a tongue-tied mumble of confusion. They may come up with the stock question for all workers in the adult industry: what's a nice girl like you doing in a job like this? By contrast, women are usually overcome with curiosity from the start. What do you actually do? They ask. Do you tie people up, spank their bottoms, whip their backsides? Or, as one of my relatives once famously asked, do you really touch men's willies? As though doing such a thing would never have occurred to her in a million years. The answer, of course, is all of the above and much, much more, albeit with the ever-present health protection of an endless supply of medical-grade latex gloves. Within my chambers, you can be prodded and probed, exposed and explored, bound and beaten. Far more important than any of the physical contact, however, is the psychological impact I have on the minds of my male and female clients. I pride myself on taking submissive men and women on private journeys to explore areas of their sexuality where fantasy rules and pain and pleasure intermingle. I can give you an idea of what happens in my sessions with recent, real-life examples of the games that I play. Firstly, with one of my regular male clients. Secondly, with a girl who visits sporadically when she feels a need to be dominated by another woman. And lastly, with a couple who regularly experience the delights of my chambers together. Chapter 3. Those who play together stay together. Picking a random man to best represent my customer base proved harder than I'd imagined. Looking back on recent sessions, I realized that sexual tastes, individual perversions, and everyone's experience with BDSM activities vary so widely that it's hard to settle on any average client. In the end, I opted for Colin, obviously a pseudonym, as are all the names of clients in this book, but a real man who worked in the legal profession, as do quite a few of my clients. What is it about working as a lawyer that predisposes one to be submissive? Colin is intelligent, educated, good company, well-traveled, and comparatively wealthy. He is in his mid-50s, married with grown-up children, and although I have, of course, never mixed with him in normal society, I do not doubt for a moment that he is a pillar of his local community. He also adores the feel, the scent, and the texture of rubber against his naked skin. He has described his need to me on many occasions. Over the years, I start to think about rubber, how it feels and smells, and then begin to imagine what we did on the last occasion I saw you. I play each session back in my mind, sometimes masturbating to the memory of being covered in a rubber bag or a sheet, and playing in my mind with the sensations I felt at that time. I don't feel ashamed of wanting this, but it is not something that I could ever share with anyone at all, and certainly not with my wife. I don't think she'd understand, but even if she did, it's not something I could share with her. Eventually, even though I have tried not to see you so often, I can't resist picking up the phone and calling your number. Then the anticipation builds to fever pitch as the day of my appointment gets closer. Colin appears on my bookings list with great regularity, once a month or so, when his desire for latex encasement and a certain level of discipline begins to overwhelm his senses. In the immediate aftermath of a lengthy rubber session with me, he is content to resume normal life and normal vanilla sex with his partner for a while. Then, rather like a reformed smoker requiring a nicotine fix, he feels the need to turn up once again at my door. Like many of my clients, Colin has no real idea as to why he enjoys his particular fetish. Examining his childhood reveals no credible clues to explain his desires, and he has no real interest in finding out more. He has the money, the freedom, and the inclination to explore his deepest desires with me and feels comfortable about doing just that. His sessions tend to follow a set pattern, although I strive to introduce a new element into the scene on every visit. The insertion of a wild card moment into the mix keeps the games fresh and, more importantly, safeguards me against the danger of boredom. I love my job, and I love the way I can enhance each person's desires by adding in activities or fantasies pulled from my own imagination. Without that element of creativity, my role would be mechanical and repetitive. It is my sexual imagination that makes it exciting, rewarding, and fun. For a typical session, Colin will strip naked and dress in some of the vast selection of rubber clothes that hang in my dungeon's wardrobes. Elbow-high rubber gloves, full-length rubber stockings, a tight-fitting but open-face rubber hood, a rubber jerkin, and possibly rubber chaps covering his lower limbs but leaving both his backside and genitalia exposed and available. Depending on my own mood, I may leave him to dress himself, or fuss around him, dictating exactly what I want him to wear, whether he likes it or not. It's fascinating to see his manner change as each rubber layer is applied. Before my eyes, Colin changes from a confident and slightly brash solicitor to a humble and obedient slave, desperate to obey my every instruction. There's no need for shouting or harsh words with him. His desperation to please me binds him to my will. By now, Colin's hands have been secured out of the way. He's encased in latex and enjoying every moment of the scene. But I am not called the bondage mistress for nothing. His rubber experience has barely just begun. I've already chosen a second hood to go over his head. My selection ranges from terrifying, heavy rubber bags with the smallest of air holes, through to numerous gas masks and hoods. My current favorite is an elaborate German design in which air may only be drawn in through multiple tubes, attached to a smell bag container strapped to Colin's chest. The smell bag does just what it says on the tin. Scented items of any description can be placed in the bag to swamp the wearer with the chosen aroma. The contents are limited only by my imagination, although it may not surprise you to know that my worn rubber thongs are a particular delight for many of my slaves. Depending on the design of hood which I've chosen, I might then add a rubber pump-up gag with a breathing tube, a tightly restricting collar, and even a rubber blindfold. In Colin's case, even such an extreme outfit is rarely enough. He needs strapping down to my medical bench and tucking up tight with one or more heavy rubber blankets around his head and body. Only when every inch of his body is pressed down under multiple layers of latex will I consider offering some form of sexual relief. I'll sometimes attach him to my milking machine, converted agricultural unit once employed on milking Frisians, but now capable of masturbating and sucking up to for slaves at once. It rarely takes Colin long to achieve the desired result if I decide that his good behavior has earned him an orgasm. By contrast with my difficulties in choosing an average man, an easy choice presents itself when it comes to couples. I love playing with couples. They are always such good fun. Sometimes, if they are living and playing together as a couple in real life, they bring their own equipment, which will always excite me. As an equipment and sexual gadget junkie, I adore anything new I can get my hands on. Oh, please let me have a go. On occasions, both partners are submissive, and then I can have the titillation of linking them together in bondage. Jonathan and Elaine are an unlikely pairing who really know how to party. Both married, but not to each other. They met on a BDSM internet website and come together only for sex and domination games. Both cheating on their straight sex partners. They are the perfect example of the way in which the internet and a desire for unusual sex can connect people who would otherwise never have met. Today's more public face of BDSM is perhaps the reason why more and more couples now visit my chambers together. I've always had a preponderance of male clients, although lone women are far from unknown. Now, there's a noticeable trend towards the idea that couples who play together stay together. Elaine is a charming, flirtatious, highly submissive young lady. Jonathan, 20 years older, is equally charming and switches between the roles of dominant and submissive with consummate ease. I sometimes session with Jonathan on his own, but Elaine only visits West London Towers in Jonathan's company. I described her above as submissive, but that's not quite correct. She is a confirmed masochist who sometimes refuses to submit at all. She can be defiant and cheeky in order to goad Jonathan and me into increasing the severity of whichever punishment she is suffering at the time. On one visit, Jonathan tied Elaine naked to the medical bench and spread her legs apart in the gynecological stirrups. Her blindfold prevented her from seeing who might be touching her or what might happen to her. Next, as arranged with Jonathan, I left him to play with her for a while, but then slipped silently into the room to run my rubber-gloved hands across her helpless body. I could see she was desperately trying to work out what was happening as two hands started caressing her nipples and a further two hands delved between her legs. The hands pinching her nipples were Jonathan's. The hands stroking her clitoris were mine. Now should perhaps say here that I am completely heterosexual in my private life. I can appreciate when a woman is attractive, but I am not attracted myself. In my own wildest fantasies, I am always surrounded by men, preferably about a dozen of them all playing with me at any one time, but I have no problems in dominating women if it enhances the fun of couples who are paying for my time. This occasion though, Lane was not there to be lovingly caressed. She was seeking pain and discomfort, and that's something I'm always happy to provide. She had never experienced needle play, something of a speciality of mine, and I wanted to introduce her to those new sensations before inserting the finest of needles, scrupulously sterile and obtained from a leading medical equipment supplier, cleaned her breasts with alcohol swabs. Elaine's blindfold had by then already been removed so that she might fully anticipate what was about to happen. As always, it is the prospect of pain, more than the pain itself, which starts the adrenaline pumping. With fingers clad in surgeon's latex gloves, I carefully inserted a needle on either side of each nipple. She winced and whimpered as each point broke the skin, but was clearly enjoying both the pain and the sight of her nipples now interlaced with the gleam of metal pins. My final task was to push the needle tips into two small corks. I would hate any of my clients, or me, to jab themselves unnecessarily. Seeking to bring the couple's session to a suitably climatic end, I donned one of my biggest strap-on cocks and positioned myself between Elaine's thighs. Jonathan had readied his video camera to record the abuse I was about to inflict on his partner. I have an enormous variety of rubber, plastic, and even metal dildos available to use on either men or women. Some are rock-hard plastic, some are made of softer rubber, and quite a few of them vibrate. They all fit interchangeably into a custom-made leather and elasticized strap harness which sits securely around my waist and thighs to give me a fox erection of which any man would be proud. This ever-ready penis collection comes in a variety of colors, although that never seems to be of much importance to male clients. Perhaps because they are often blindfolded or because I am usually standing behind them when I put them to use. Women, however, seem to care for more about the visual impact of a scene, and so it was for Elaine's benefit that I was that evening wearing a particularly fetching pink cock which I knew would stretch her to her limits. I took my time ensuring that the dildo sat securely in my harness, and then took even longer ostentatiously lubricating the tip and the shaft of the erect member in order to increase the theatricality of the occasion. So much of what I do in my sessions is, in reality, pure theater, a carefully choreographed performance designed to heighten my client's sexual desire, and therefore their subsequent pleasure. It's never enough so simply spank, or crop, or cane a man's behind, for example. Far better to render him helpless, warm his rear with some stylishly delivered slaps from my hand, and then allow him to watch as I take my time in selecting the next implement from a hook on the wall. I'll be chatting to him or just to myself throughout the process. Now let me see, this crop might be good, or perhaps this one. It's a little whippier and more painful, which is just what you need. Performing like an actress on stages, of course, also the reason why I have wardrobes full of exotic and erotic rubber and leather uniforms, along with racks of thigh-high boots and stiletto-heeled shoes. All are needed for the constant costume changes required to keep the Miranda show up and running. Numerous performances a week, and matinee appearances on demand. However, returning to my couple story, I could hear Jonathan's breathing grow heavier and see that his excitement levels were visibly burgeoning as I readied Elaine for penetration. He was having trouble holding his camera steady as I gently eased my fox cock between her outer vulva lips and pushed into the hilt. After an hour of steadily increasing pain and discomfort, Elaine was more than ready to receive me. Like all true masochists, her excitement increases with each step up her personal pain ladder as a session progresses. Her pain is no less unpleasant than it would be to you or to me. But for her, the sensation of pain translates into sexual pleasure. To increase her fun further, pressed a vibrator against the hood of her clitoris and told Jonathan to lightly touch the needles piercing each of her areola. It was a combination of pain and pleasure which I knew Elaine would be unable to resist. In due course, she proved me right. Her climax, which, although I say it myself, was a rather spectacular example of my work, left one person in the room still frustrated and desperate for relief. Poor Jonathan was begging for one of us girls to lend him a hand. Elaine, who clearly was used to doing his bidding, duly reached out and started to stroke him. My urgent command stopped her in her tracks. No, Elaine, don't touch. He hasn't earned any pleasure, and he is not getting a climax tonight. A look of desperation crossed Jonathan's face, but he knows better than to argue with his mistress once a decision has been made. I'm amazed that women don't always appreciate the power of sometimes leaving a man frustrated and desperate to ejaculate. They may get a little sulky and stomp around for a bit, but that mood passes, leaving them compliant and attentive enough to make any woman happy. Having dealt with typical male and couples clients, that leaves one other category unaccounted for: the single women who occasionally fall into my hands, ignoring for a moment the many men who come to me seeking to be made up and dressed as a woman. Women do add a spice of variety to life, but I can't deny that they can be hard work. Perhaps it's because I am a heterosexual woman that I find pleasuring a man to be a relatively simple affair. A few rapid strokes, a little verbal erotica to get his heart racing, and voila, a climax is almost guaranteed. Much of the time one doesn't even need a full erection. What could possibly be easier? Some women do come easily, over and over again, while others struggle to reach that moment at all, despite hours of patient work by their partners. No one method guarantees success, and it is only when a woman tries giving another woman an orgasm that she appreciates the problems men face throughout their lives. However, one female client fortunately proved to have no difficulty whatsoever in finding sexual satisfaction at my hands. Lorraine is a professional lap dancer and television adult channel performer with a body to die for. A genuine submissive and masochist, she likes me to push her limits a little further with each visit. I adore variety above all else in my sexual games, and Lorraine gives me ample chance to employ a little used technique to give her the pain she desires. She is a particular fan of bastinado, the ancient torture of caning the soles of the feet. Her tolerance for the pain this produces is astonishingly high. As one of my male slaves learned to his cost, he should never have agreed to take part in a film foot caning contest between himself and Lorraine. To make things easier for me, I tied the male submissive to my whipping bench and strapped Lorraine to my bondage throne, convenient arm's length away. Each had their bare feet raised and perfectly presented for the blows to come. The winner was to be the one who lasted longest before having to use his or her safe word as described earlier to bring the contest to a close. As always, I began the session gently and then steadily increased the torment they were required to endure. I have found over the years that this gradual progression through any form of play or punishment is essential to get the best from my slaves. Many novice mistresses and, I am sad to say, some experienced ones as well, seemingly fail to understand the importance of that rule. Given that the purpose of the game is to help the slave explore to the full his or her own sexual desire, there seems little point in steaming in so hard that limits of endurance are reached within moments. A little patience pays considerable dividends. To that end, I began my bastinado Olympics by employing a light flogger with multiple strands of soft suede which sting but cause no serious pain. Both of my contestants knew me well enough to have realized that this was but the first stage of this unusual type of podiatry. Indeed, as is my wont, I had laid out a small selection of different instruments on the bench where both contestants could see them. Anticipation is all. We progressed to a more punishing riding crop, moved up a gear through one or two of the lighter, whippier canes, and then onto the heaviest cane, which I was confident would sort out the men from the boys. So it proved to be. The first few swipes across the sole of his foot soon dragged the safe word from my male subbie's lips. Lorraine had a little smile of triumph on her face as she heard her male companion cry out for his mummy, the particularly humiliating phrase that I make him use as a safe word when he truly needs me to stop. It had proved to be no contest, with my female champion easily dispatching her opponent inside a few rounds. The loser was sent from the room, and I decided that Lorraine's prize was to be a session on the medical bench with multiple needles through various tender parts of her body. This was new to Lorraine, and although she tolerated a few needles through her nipples, I soon discovered her limits as the first metal tip touched the skin of her labia majora, with real tears of fear running down her cheeks. Lorraine begged me to stop, but I knew she could take more if she tried. I had already laid out the exact number of needles ready to be inserted, and in such cases I work on the same principle as those governing the samurai warriors of ancient Japan. Legend has it that a samurai sword, once unsheathed, cannot be put away without being used, and so it is with me. Once the needles are ready and waiting, they have to find a home. In such situations, I have found that a calm but utterly determined tone of voice can encourage any slave further along the path of complete submission than they may have expected. "You are going to take more needles, young lady," I insisted. "I know you don't want to, and I know they hurt, but you do want to please me, don't you? That's why these needles are going in now. Then we can get this nasty stage over and done with and move on. That's what we all want, isn't it?" My script may sound ineffective when viewed in cold print, but whispered close to a slave's ear, with the correct tone of voice and the authority that I've spent decades perfecting, it works every time. I backed up my words with actions by popping my half a dozen remaining needles right through her outer labia lips to accompanying squeals of pain from my now quiescent client. Even now, Lorraine's fun was not over. I pointed out that the unsheathed needle points were now resting gently on her inner vaginal lips, and that any movement from her would likely result in a fascinating but unusual self-piercing experience. "I suggest you lay very still," I instructed as I left the room. "Don't move, and I'll be back in a while to set you free." Still nervous, still shaking a little, and still crying, Lorraine had little choice. She meekly accepted her fate. Examining the enjoyment I received from ill-treating my Slavagirl, I realized that I do get a thrill from imposing my will over her, from making her obey my commands, with appropriate discipline and encouragement if required. There is, however, a huge difference between the reward I get from dominating a woman and the sexual charge I can get from dealing with a man. As a heterosexual, I still get my own sexual kick out of sessions with any male, even after 2 decades of practicing just about every imaginable form of domination game. I've never been one for self-reflection or for analyzing why I am the way I am, so I don't know why it is that I relish submission from others in both my professional and personal lives. The debate between nature and nurture seems to me to be a mystery, with so many variables that no answer will ever be found. Even so, I recognize that my life has taken an unusual course, and that this might well be related to my somewhat unusual childhood. It was a happy childhood, running smoothly for years, until the day I discovered that all of my happiness was built on a lie.